Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catalyst Energies. My name is Dee. Thank you for joining me. I am so grateful that you are here. Welcome, everyone, to this vernal equinox seasonal forecast. We're going to go over the main astrological themes for the next couple of months, from equinox to solstice, right? Just look at the main trends that are going to be unfolding. So welcome back, everyone. If you're new here, welcome. Thank you for being here. You know the drill. If you like this content, it's helpful, you want to support Catalyst Energies, interact with the content somehow. Subscribe, like, share, comment. It all sends a message to the algorithm. Do not let them fool you into thinking AI is making any decisions. It is only doing what it's programmed to do. So be part of that and be part of that process. So in this video, you are probably going to listen and watch, but I am going to give some information not only about the vernal equinox in terms of the seasonal forecast. This is an astrology video. That is where we're going to focus here, but also look at what is a vernal equinox, get some foundation in terms of the material aspect. What is our relationship to the sun? Because this is what these seasonal forecasts are really marking. These are quarterly markers in our relationship to our sun. So we're going to talk about the standard model, talk about some alternative solar system models, how that might play into a vernal equinox, look at the astronomy software, right? Kind of a planetarium style, and look a little bit at, well, what does the vernal equinox actually mark? Like, what are we looking at here in the actual sky, and relate it to changing of the ages, because actually the vernal equinox is the main pinpoint of designation of moving from age to age, which is really moving from one constellation along the ecliptic to the next, which usually happens in roughly a 2,000 year span, right? So we know we're moving from the age of Pisces into Aquarius, and that's marked by the vernal equinox. And so we're going to get some foundation here on what we're actually talking about. Talk about some alternatives, right? We don't have to just accept the standard model. Science is never settled, and it's always about observation, collecting data, and analyzing it and coming to conclusions. But the more information that you are learning and observing and analyzing, your conclusions change, right? So anybody who says science is settled is either really doesn't understand what they're talking about, and thinks they do, or they're intentionally trying to mislead you so that you stop asking questions and being curious about the world around you. So that's why I like to talk about alternatives. I'm not condemning one or another. I'm not supporting one or another in this broadcast, at least. I'm just giving multiple options of ways to think about things. But of course, this is an astrology video, which is an art form in as much as it is a technical modality. So it'll be my interpretation of what I think is going on in terms of the patterns and the cosmic clock. So normally I would be flashing some sort of promotional material to get a personal reading for the vernal equinox and the season ahead, but those readings are already sold out. So I make them available to my subscribers first, and then I make them publicly available. Well, they've already snatched them all up, and so there are no vernal equinox readings left, at least from me. So there are certainly other services that I offer that are available on my website. And if you are interested in a transit reading, right, what's coming up in the next coming months, and especially since this season does include the next eclipse cycle, which has the big April 8th eclipse, right, the total solar eclipse that's going to be crossing, diagonally across the U.S. from northeast to southwest, among other parts of this continent. So the fear porn and the prepper propaganda are just all over the place. We don't know what's going to happen. I certainly don't, which is why I don't make predictions. It's just potentials, and how we interact with those potentials is what determines what actually happens. So that's why I think astrology is very useful, because there are potentials that have different signatures than others at different times, right? We're looking at cosmic patterns, and the frequency of light coming from these bodies has an interaction on us. So if you are interested in an eclipse reading, you want to know what this next 6 months, what this eclipse cycle in general has to do with you and your personal charts, there are a couple of these left. You would just go to my website. It's linked in the description box. Go to the bookings tab, and then you can pick one of the options, a 60-minute or a 90-minute recorded reading. And you need to just know your birth details, and then we go from there. So, but yes, this season does include the next eclipse cycle, and that's because the nodes of the moon are in the signs on the axis of Aries and Libra, and the vernal equinox is always the marker for 0 degrees Aries in terms of Western astrology. So always trying to do a little bit of education here around basic astrological terms, but this is available, hence my promotional marketing portion of this video, and now we can move on. So I often, I like to just find stock images of whatever I'm talking about, and that's what I have up here. This is just really encompasses what we're talking about with an equinox, right? An equal amount of daylight and not daylight, and talking about the interplay of duality also includes a balance point, like just, that there is tension always with duality. There is an interplay, it's dynamic, but there are moments, just like with these equinoxes, where that dynamic interaction, our relationship to the sun, right, our planet's relationship to the sun in its journey, in its now, and we'll talk about that, is it, what is rotating around what? There are alternatives, and anybody who says the science is settled about that just doesn't know what they're talking about. So I do like this image just to give a visual frame of reference here for what we're going to talk about. This equal, all things being equal, right? The seed point is now viable and ready for all of its creative potential to be unlocked and to grow in this life, right? And it does start from a place of internalized balance. So this does look AI generated. Most of the stock images that you find now are definitely AI generated. So, but the daffodils, especially where I'm at, right? I'm in the United States, North America, it's springtime here, and the daffodils are starting to pop up. And so that's a pretty good indicator that we're getting to this point of year. So let's talk about the vernal equinox itself, right? I said that we would have a foundation in some materialism and at least multiple conceptions of what that is. So the idea, if you are a person that tends towards the belief system or the reality, I guess, that we are on a spinning globe, on the surface of a spinning globe, and that this globe goes around the sun just like every other planet, then these equinoxes are based on the position in that orbit around the sun because of the angle that the planet is on its axis. So the planet's on a 23.5 degree axis. It is rotating on its axis, and then it's rotating around the sun in its orbit, and twice a year its position allows for an equal amount of light and dark throughout the whole planet, right? So again, there's that interplay of opposites or duality, right? Light and dark, that has a moment, a 0 point of balance, right? That the scales eventually do come into balance. Or in the case of the seed, all of the creative potential is at this, is just that. It's all potential energy in one place, ready to be released. So there are alternatives, and I was just like, okay, I wonder what Flat Earth has to say about where we get these equinoxes, because when you look at a model like this and you conceptualize our relationship to the other planets in the solar system, to the sun, in the same way, well, this makes a lot of sense, right? It's just like, yeah, of course this is how, it would look. So what would Flat Earth, how do they explain the equinoxes? There's just not a lot to go on if you, a cursory search. I really didn't try that hard, and that's because you're not going to find any good or at least unbiased information through Google on a search, right? I mean, because it's one of its jobs is to completely destroy anybody questioning anything, even if it's flat Earth, right? And so You don't find a lot of good information about people. The only thing you do find is like, oh, they can't explain it. And I don't know if they can or not because I can't find anything credible to look at. But what I do know that's credible is, and those of you who are Catalyst Classroom people, you know exactly what I'm going to talk about, is Tycho Brahe's model of the solar system. Now, Tycho Brahe, and I'll show you graphic in a little bit so that you can do some research on your own, you know, in terms of how to spell his name and some more information. But Tycho Brahe was a Renaissance Danish astronomer. He is considered to have the most accurate in terms of predictions, like things like eclipses and things like that. His modeling of the solar system was done without telescopes, right? And so he was more accurate than, say, like Galileo, okay? He, through observation and mathematics, right, he modeled this solar system. Now, I found this graphic that I thought was really cool because it's got the zodiac, the astrological calendar on the outside in the traditional setting where Aries is on the left, and that's the beginning, the first house, and it goes all the way around. So you can actually look at this like you would look at an astrology chart as well, which I really like. Because an astrology chart, like a natal chart, is geocentric, right? The Earth is at the center of the chart, and then you look at and cast everything in its position relative to you being at the center of your field of view. This is geocentric and heliocentric, right? The standard astrophysical modern model of the solar system is heliocentric, that the sun is in the center and everything else revolves around it. Well, Tycho Brahe's model is both. That the Earth really is the center of the whole thing, and the sun does have an orbit around the Earth, but then everything else, as you can see here, has its orbit around the sun. And then you add the astrological calendar around it, which kind of blew my mind, and you see how it could very easily work out. It looks a lot like the astrological clock in Prague, which is really interesting because Tycho Brahe died in Prague. So Prague was like, you know, at one point, the Enlightenment, or even the Renaissance as well, like 15th, 16th century was a big deal. There were just so many people that converged there and went there to study, went there to do like scientific work and philosophy. It was a center in terms of this. So anyway, how would a vernal equinox work if we're talking about living on a flat plane and not living on the surface of a rotating globe? Well, Tycho Brahe's model might shine some light on that, no pun intended. Well, not intended, but certainly accepted. That if, imagine that we were on a flat plane and it was the sun that was revolving around us, then you would, in that same pattern of 365 days, right? Then there would be the same patterning of light and dark if the plane that we were on was flat and that the sun was going around us. So it's just an idea. It's an alternative. I like to put them out there. It really is just food for thought and taking people in new directions. So the next thing I want to look at is something about the significance of the vernal equinox itself. So number one, we're gonna look here, if I can find it. We're gonna look at my telescope's astronomy software. So it's kind of like being in a planetarium. So the vernal equinox is different is 0 degrees Aries, but the vernal equinox is represented by the amount of sunlight versus dark. It's an equal amount. So that never changes, but the position relative to us in the sky is always changing, and that's known as precession. So for every 72 years, we move a degree through, I don't want to say the zodiac, but through space, basically, if you want to say it that way. So and there are different again, the standard modern astrophysical model is that the wobble of the earth on its axis means that we, every 72 years we wobble a degree, which in my mind doesn't really make any sense. But the Vedic literature, the ancient Vedic literature in particular, talks about how it's really precession is about our journey through the galaxy, right? And that the entire solar system is precessing through the galaxy, which is why we go through the ages, right? And so for every 2,000 years, the sun at the vernal equinox, that time of equal light and dark, will be in a certain constellation. And as you can see here, and I have this at a very specific date, and I'm going to tell you what it is in a second, but this is the sun at the vernal equinox in the constellation boundary of Pisces. And if we were to go, and I'm going to show you this now real quick where we are now, and then I'm going to go back and show you what that was, because that position is really interesting. So this is vernal equinox, there we go, this year. You can see here that it's almost to the age of Aquarius, right? We're not quite there. And if I show you how long it really will take for the sun to be in the constellation boundary of Aquarius when we officially reach the age of Aquarius, you'll realize that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before the sun actually gets into this portion of the sky. And you can see how the ecliptic is going over and over and over, right? So I'm at 2435, 2500 roughly, that the sun is just starting to come into the portion of sky known as Aquarius. So we're not really there yet, but we're close in terms of the cosmic cycle, right? The 26,000 year cycle, right? The 4 yugas. We're really close. But it's not happening tomorrow, and we're certainly not there yet. But these cycles are so big, and the amount of evolution or planetary changes that happen in these cycles are also so big, and they take so long that we are really close. And clearly, just by looking at this, we really are. So the vernal equinox, that point of light and dark, not only designates 0 degrees Aries in Western astrology, and everything else is based along that in terms of the zodiac, but it also is how we measure what age we're in. So we're still at the age of Pisces, but we're at the very first couple degrees of Pisces, right? Like really fresh into Pisces. So here's the thing. This is really interesting. I thought it was interesting. I don't know. I'm sure other people will find it interesting as well. So, and I am not in any way, shape, or form like a biblical scholar or anything to that effect. So, but I have heard that the actual date in terms of a year, if we were to actually go back based on our current calendar, of Jesus and his crucifixion, I think it was, but there's also the idea that he was actually born during this time too. Either way, it's either he was born or he died. Well, this is 33 CE, right? And there is, if I remember correctly, there is actually like even scholarly work to suggest that this is actually the year, either that he died or he was born in March, the vernal equinox. Now, what do you see here? Number one, there's Venus, the morning star, just in a direct conjunction to the sun at the equinox. But what's this? It's the moon. It's the new moon. And when it's like this with the sun, what does that mean? It means it's an eclipse. It's an eclipse. So it's very interesting. And this is at the beginning of Pisces, right? And so we got some time before the second coming, if you know what I'm saying here. We got a couple hundred years yet before that's coming. So sometimes it feels like people are trying to force God's hand, and you're just not gonna do it, because these cycles are much bigger and much more consistent than humanity's individual egos, what they think they want. So anyway, the vernal equinox not only marks the beginning of the Western astrology chart, 0 degrees Aries, and then designates everything in the zodiac that we measure, but it also is how we determine what age we're in, because every 2,000 years we move through into a new constellation or portion of sky. I just thought this was pretty interesting that the eclipse is here, that it's conjunct Venus, which is the morning star, and that's very interesting. So, and we are at an eclipse, right? We're at a vernal equinox eclipse, basically, right? I mean, the north node is currently at 15 to 16 degrees Aries, so we're in the home stretch. So we're, you know, maybe we are, maybe this is the second coming. Who knows? But we're not out of the woods, and we're certainly not out of Pisces anytime soon. Not in our lifetimes, at least. So I'm sure some people are trying to have their life extension so they can see this whole thing through, but I'm not one of those people. So now that we got all that stuff out of the way, let me show you Tycho Brahe because his mustache is amazing. And the painting definitely seems like it could be an embellishment until you see the statue, the actual bronze statue, and he's got the mustache. You look at this guy, total badass. I'm really into Tycho Brahe specifically because he was really bucking the system, and he had unprecedented, like this is even what Wikipedia says, unprecedentedly accurate astronomical observations and comprehensive, right? No telescope. And he's the one that had the Helios geocentric model of the solar system. So that's if you want to look up Tycho Brahe and see what he's all about. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting Earth is flat, not flat. I'm not here to talk about any of that. I am giving you alternatives, and they were coming from a pioneering Danish astronomer from the Renaissance, the 16th century. So if anybody tries to throw that shit in your face, just bring up Tycho Brahe and see what happens. Because he's not some, you know, you can't really... Yeah, see, using just his naked eye, he observed the planets, moons, stars, and space and recorded everything he saw. Amazing. See, you don't need all that fancy tech. You just need your eyeballs and the mind that the Great Spirit has endowed you with. So, now, let's get into the vernal equinox. And honestly, it feels like this season really started it did start with the Chinese New Year, which is really difficult in my personal world. But that's and we just had the Pisces new moon, but the astrological new year is definitely the equinox, the vernal equinox, the equal, all things being equal, the equal amount of light and dark, the signaling of a shift in the seasons, in our relationship with the sun, and letting us know that, and giving us an opportunity really to experience balance when we're always in flux. It's always dynamic. You don't ever find that stagnation naturally, and if you do, that's where you get problems. And so there's always a tension, and a dynamic tension with all of life and polarity, and these moments remind us that as much as there is tension, there is balance, and that balance is the potential energy of the seed and all of its creative potential. Now, with the fact that we have eclipses like right here with the equinox, it really suggests to me that the seed point that we are all kind of creatively sustained by in our own individual lives, whatever that is for us, is undergoing something that's more than just a seasonal change. It's deeply soul oriented, and it's something that I can't go into right now because it has to do with, the eclipse forecast is going to cover what it really means. But just know that the upcoming eclipses, especially the solar eclipse in Aries, right, is something that is meant to incubate for the next 6 months, is something that is going to take us through at a soul level over the next 6 months. And there's no way to really know. And even with this last new moon in Pisces, if you haven't watched that video, and even if you're not a Pisces person, just to get an idea of the general themes of the new moon, like we are really being tasked with surrendering all of the conditioning that we have had put upon us, and really just strip it all away and return back to just a really early tactile awareness of hope and goodness in the world and what that feels like, right? That's the thing about Pisces, is the feels. So, and we're still technically in Pisces season. We haven't gotten to the equinox yet, which is why I'm starting here. Saturday into Sunday, the 16th and the 17th, there is a transit that is really important. So always with these quarter moons, which is the one that we're going to talk about, and I talked a lot about this already with the weekly astrology report, so I don't want to go too much into it, but just to say that this, even starting the weekend before the equinox, we're really starting to acknowledge what it is that we do have, becoming very aware, becoming very emotionally aware, right? Spiritually aware, and a knowing that our cup is always full. It's overflowing when we're tapped into source directly. And that allows us to release ourselves personally, emotionally, maybe in our families. This moon in Gemini that's going to be in a square to the sun and Neptune on St. Patrick's Day, basically. This is a moment where we can release ourselves from some burden, right? Whatever it is. And just like bankruptcy in society allows one to be released from the burden of something that they will never be able to take care of. This first quarter moon with the sun and Neptune together is this moment to release ourselves of what we don't want to bring into the cycle, the next cycle with us, the season, right? All of the new potential of the next cycle, which is what 0 degrees Aries represents. It's the beginning, right? It's the seed point. So even this weekend, to start really thinking about, to start tapping into and feeling what it is that fills your cup and is always full, and becoming very aware and not being delusional about it and thinking that there's nothing that you need to let go of, right? We all have something that needs to be released from us. And this first quarter moon is definitely a crisis point that we all have in our lives. Usually it's usually very personal, and it forces an issue to the surface. So it's already starting. Another really big piece of this season is that Mercury is in Aries, and it will retrograde in Aries. And that Mercury enters its shadow on the 18th, so the day before the equinox, when the sun enters the sign of Aries, right, reaches that point. Mercury in Aries, right? So our thoughts, our communications, our words, either written, spoken, or even just thought about, they have that flashpoint, spontaneous output, and fresh and new, and sometimes too spontaneous, right? And think about the ram. That is what Aries represents, the horns of the ram. So Mercury already here has certainly presented all of those things, but the retrograde in Mercury is going to be a big part of this season. So Mercury is entering its shadow on the 18th. It will station retrograde on the 1st of April at 27 to 28 degrees Aries. That is something that we will talk about in other forecasts, I'm sure, because it's a huge starseed component, right? 28 degrees Aries is connected to the Andromeda galaxy. So it will station retrograde. It'll be retrograde throughout April. It will station direct on April 25th, which is a date that I really strongly urge you to pay attention to. For reasons I can't really say, I don't want to say out loud, I'm just going to say that the 25th, when Mercury stations direct, there's a lot of focus on the eclipse itself, and I'm not saying that there isn't something around the corner with that, especially because the eclipse will be conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer. Something we're really going to focus on in that forecast. But the 25th, when Mercury stations direct at 16 degrees Aries, that is something where we're going to have to really be, this retrograde, we're going to have to really consider all of our mental output and really listen and pay attention to to things so that we know exactly where we are attuned mentally and in our cognition and in our nervous system when it comes to the end of April, right? There's some pretty amazing transits at the end of April into May that really are just, they feel, wow, like they're big and they're really momentous, and they just give so much power and opportunity. Like there's a lot to be said for what's coming, and it might be really difficult, but the difficulty is for those who are not taking the initiative within themselves to take, to make the most out of crisis points, whatever they are for you. So Mercury going retrograde in Aries is a big part of the season. It'll come out of its shadow in mid-May and then move on. There will be Mercury conjunctions with the Sun, or a Mercury cazimi. There'll be lots of conjunctions with Mercury in Aries. Obviously the Sun, obviously Chiron, and clearly Venus. When Venus comes into Aries, there's going to be conjunctions as well. So there's, the Aries energy is very easily accessible with the personal planets. Sun, and, well, that's not a planet, but you know what I mean. The Sun is our ego expressing itself. Mercury and Venus, right? Personal planets, our minds and our bodies. All in the area of the new seed potential. So nothing is guaranteed at this point. That's anybody that grows a garden and grows from seed knows that it's not until the plant puts down its roots that things are really established. And that happens at the solstice. That's when the sun comes into the sign of Cancer, which in the astrology chart, the nadir is the root system. So even this weekend, you can see that the moon comes into Cancer. It's going to pass the solstice point of 0 degrees Cancer soon after that first quarter moon, right? And so there'll be this very deep, kind of sensitive, intuitive sense of, okay, I at least feel where my root system, like using your intuition to feel where those root systems are meant to go. And then knowing that over the course of the next couple of months, that everything is going to lead up to those root systems being established. But just like a plant growing, you have the seed, you have the soil, and then you have germination, which is going to be Gemini time, right? That's going to be May into June. So there's so much growth. Now there'll be tests. There will be tests leading up to the solstice, right? Because there will be lots of squares to Saturn and Neptune up in Pisces, right? And once things come into Gemini, they're all going to square Saturn and Neptune in Gemini before the solstice. So there will be those tests coming up. But in the meantime, even with the eclipse, I mean, I just feel like there's so much opportunity to make the most of whatever's coming down the pipeline. So, or to take the initiative to just visualize and put your energy towards something that's not related to that specific outcome and see what happens, right? That's the thing. See what happens, right? We can just absorb what is being told to us over and over and over again to fear this and to fear that, or we can kind of take it, our own consciousness and our free will into our own hands and decide what we're going to do with it. So, but I feel like it really starts here with Mercury coming into its shadow, because this retrograde is going to have quite a bit of impact on us, as most Mercury retrogrades do, I think. But the fact that it's in Aries, we have the eclipse in the Aries-Libra axis, we have the equinox happening. It's just, there's so much new potential here. And having Mercury here means that, like, our words, our thoughts, our communications, our capacity to even listen and respond to the environment as well is really important right now. So, and that means we can't be distracted. So, the actual equinox itself is going to be on the 19th, like I said. Mars is going to come into Pisces right after that. And then the spiritual war begins, right, when Mars comes into Pisces. Then the eclipse on the 25th. So let's start moving ahead here and just showing you what's happening in the zodiac, right? And so you see that Sun is going to sextile Pluto right after the equinox, but the full moon lunar eclipse This is going to be the beginning of eclipse season. It's along the Aries and Libra axis. And then right after that is when Mercury stations retrograde. And like I said, it will be conjunct the Andromeda galaxy. This is a huge starseed activation for people who are into starseed identities or experiences, or people who are into galactic astrology. This is a big deal. And the Andromedan signature is very much very independent, very freedom oriented, very much like not putting roots down, because it's still the seed, right? All the potential is still very much in the seed, and so it's about being free to be oneself at any given moment. So but then the retrograde happens, and we have to really consider and proofread and kind of go internally and inwardly and consider some of that potential, right? And what we're actually going to do with it. Because we might find that we get to a point that we even, people expected a lot of us. Perhaps there was a lot of talk, right? And a lot of rash decisions, hasty things put out there without really thinking about it, because Mercury in Aries is really spontaneous. And then it's just like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe I need to go back over that, because people are not digging that at all. So, and that's the thing about Andromedan starseeds in particular. They're just like, nah, bye, Felicia. Like, the Andromedan starseeds are not putting up with the guilt trips. They're not putting up with the gaslighting. They're not putting up with the emotional manipulation. Now, they tend to bypass very easily and tend to be very flaky in terms of like keeping commitments. But that's because that you have to be free to be yourself in any given moment. And so, but that comes with a responsibility too, and that'll also be addressed with this Mercury retrograde. So, but it comes into its retrograde on April Fool's Day. That's pretty interesting in and of itself. So let's see if we can find that. Yes, right here. And we got Lilith sitting on the South Node right now. Oh boy. It's going to be really difficult to just attune ourselves to the potency of the work of source around us, right? That there are things that are quote unquote invisible, and it's really the work of spirit around us, right? But that's where the North Node is. That's where the soul is pulling us right now in order to grow and evolve. But there will be this this overcompensation with those who are really uncomfortable with that, and they're going to be like, no, I need to repair the link here. I got to keep my feet on the ground. I can't let myself go back out into those turbulent psychic waters, because I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe I'll get lost out there, right? And the South Node is what we've already mastered at a soul level. And this is where the first eclipse, it's a South Node eclipse. The moon will be in Libra. So it will give us a sense of where we've been, what we've mastered, but also what we have to let go of. Again, there's more to let go of and more to release ourselves from in order to almost catapult ourselves to where we're going in order to grow and evolve. And when Lilith is involved, right, I mean, she's that hole that we try to fill ourselves, and it always goes sideways when we do that. So again, there is, when you attune to the flow of the chi in your body, when you're in tune to the telluric energy of the planet, when you are in tune with spirit speaking to you, then you can just be in the moment, right? And so that's going to be difficult for people, and Lilith is going to have something to say about that if you're feeling like you're having a really hard time finding that flow, right? So and this is when Mercury stations retrograde. So there might be some control issues around things that people are like, oh, hell no. Kind of like, there's a lot of different things right now that could backfire, right? That are moving forward in terms of communication, in terms of information sharing. I'm thinking about the ban on TikTok, for instance, that, we get to April 1st and people are like, you know what, I've had it. And there may be a play here with this South Node and Lilith and Libra to be like, no, we're going to reestablish these boundaries and what's legal and lawful. And I think it's going to backfire personally. That's just my opinion. And we're going to see that backpedaling, I think, with the Mercury retrograde. Thing about Andromeda and starseeds is they are they are on the front lines of social revolution a lot of times, because liberty and freedom are primary, right? It is the primary modus operandi for Andromeda starseeds. So April 1st, Mercury stations retrograde, okay? And will be there till the 25th of April. So right after that too, so we're in the middle of the eclipse window with this right now. And so Venus comes into a conjunction with Neptune, and this is where, so the sun was already conjunct Neptune, and then Venus is going to be conjunct Neptune, and then Mars is going to be conjunct Neptune, and these are massive spiritual openings on the level of our body and our feeling. It's a massive like output of spiritual energy with Mars when that happens. The sun is going to conjunct the North Node at the same time at the very beginning of April, right? So this is where there's a big opening here. It's like we'll all be a prism in some ways, and you know, our bodies are like a prism, for instance, and then we are just filled, we are filled with the light, right? And that light breaks into many colors as our body is a prism. This is actually the degree that Venus and Neptune are conjunct in early April. So oftentimes this brings potential for because Venus rules relationships in mundane astrology, so it's like new relationships, but more compassion and spiritual bonding. And I would say at a really, when we're talking about Neptune in the last degrees of Pisces, I would say like at the most broad humanitarian level, right? Yes, Venus has more to do with our own personal wants and needs and tastes when it comes to relationships, but in conjunction with Neptune, it just dissolves all of those boundaries, and we become one with, the light of source in those moments. I feel like this is going to be very beautiful. And at the same time, the sun meets the North Node of the moon, right? The underlying unconscious drive of the soul is being illuminated by the Aries sun in this moment. I feel like there's a huge opening that happens at the beginning of April. And then we have the eclipse on the 8th, which is conjunct Chiron. Now, right after that, let me see here. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Okay, so right after that, though, on the 10th, you can see that Mars and Saturn come into their conjunction. So let's see here. This one is something to pay attention to as well. Now, there have been a number of conjunctions with Saturn, and they usually are very difficult. Now, Mars being in a conjunction with Saturn often can go both ways. It can really give you a lot of stamina and patience to complete something that's very difficult. But it also can initially make you very angry, resentful, or revengeful. And the degree that this is at, 15 Pisces, is an officer instructing the troops before a simulated assault under a barrage of live shells. So real ammunition, simulated situation, right? I can see how whatever the simulated, quote unquote, simulated assault really is, I can see people getting upset, getting resentful, getting angry, but it will be necessary that we don't take the low road in this situation. Whatever this is, right? This is a drill, honestly, right after the eclipse. And so you have to really, the danger of a Mars conjunct Saturn in general is taking risks. And so you want to stay home, sharpen your knives, work hard, be patient, use this determined energy constructively. Now, this could very well be something that goes down at this time that will, trigger people into being very angry and resentful and maybe acting out in some ways. But I would caution people and also consider that this energy can be used constructively to make the most out of it. And again, all of the imagery around the degree that this is happening suggest a drill of some sort or a thorough rehearsing. So try not to, the courage from Mars, especially the spiritual courage, is really there with Pisces. And then you have Saturn there, which is not, great, but it also gives that stamina and that patience and that sense of like, well, this is just what it is, and a sense of power around it. So Mars is the output of that energy, but Saturn represents the machinery of how you get that energy. So it can be very destructive, but it also can be incredibly creative and constructive, especially spiritually, if you take it that way. So maybe things do go down, and it is like a drill. So try not to get too pulled into it, and use that energy in a way that you can make the most out of it. Okay, so that's the 10th of April. I think people are like, don't pay attention to dates, and I would agree with that, but I would say that's not relevant if you are following astrology, because it's not about the dates, it's about the transits, and they fall on certain calendar dates. So that's really what you're looking at. So this Mars conjunct Saturn like this, I feel like, is something really to pay attention to on April 10th. So then right after that, see, it's like April is just is the Mercury Cazimi, right? Mercury and the Sun come into a conjunction with each other, and Mercury's retrograde. So again, usually the Mercury Cazimis or the Mercury Sun retrogrades, it's a very brightening influence. You become more alert, your thinking becomes brighter, quicker, you're more apt to be communicating and being out and about, but the retrograde is happening. And this degree really does suggest that it's about inner fulfillment. So maybe the thinking and communication is, and mental alertness is more thoughtful and internalized, right? Maybe you're just having these kind of aha moments within yourself. Maybe you are adaptable and curious, and it has something to do with something that you've already thought about or already talked about or communicated about, because we're in a retrograde. So yeah, it could be very busy, but I also feel like it's a busy time kind of like within yourselves, right? And maybe it is about, maybe there will be some measure of communication shutdown of some sort, and this Cazimi will really be a great opportunity to be like, well, does that mean that I have to stop having, social life or communicating with people just because these aspects aren't available to me anymore? Maybe not. I mean, that's something we're all going to have to work with. But ultimately, Sun conjunct Mercury is usually a very brightening influence, and it's a good time for social activities, new information to process. I would say with the Mercury retrograde, it's not going to be entirely new, but it's going to be a new way of understanding and processing it. That's for sure. So that's April 11th. And then Mercury conjunct Chiron, which was conjunct the solar eclipse. So Chiron's going to be a big player in all of this. And then Venus and Mercury come into a conjunction on the 19th. Now, this time frame is very important. So the 19th, and 420, it has a lot of implications, right? We know that it does. But on the 19th in particular, as we go through this season, where the Sun will come into the next sign. It's going to come into Taurus, right? And Mercury, in its retrograde, it's coming very close to the end of its retrograde, and Venus come into a conjunction, which encourages a lot of personal interaction. Venus ruling our way our relationships and how they feel to us. So it makes communication more harmonious, right? Because Venus rules harmony and being pleasant and comfortable and beautiful. So these two coming together, you just have more personal interaction, helps you share love and affection, and is really good for socializing. 18 degrees Aries is about finding that constructive, alternation of activity and rest. It's like being in a hammock, right? You yourself are at rest in the hammock, but the hammock is swinging back and forth. How do you get to this place of alternating your activity and rest? And how do you find a place where you're doing one and the same? So when these two are coming together, I feel like with Venus in particular, you're going to find that within your personal relationships or within the things that you value or have meaning to you, right? That are physically satisfying to you, because Venus likes to be physically satisfied, or harmonious, or beautiful, right? So this is a great time to tell someone that you love them or show your appreciation for them. Again, Mercury is retrograde, and so maybe it's just about bringing people together and encouraging cooperation over something that maybe had already been discussed, and now it's more thoughtful. Maybe there's just kind of putting some things to rest mentally so that you can maybe enjoy the company of other people, be social, and resolve conflicts, find peaceful settlements, right? I think that's, while the sun comes into Taurus, that's really nice. Now, look at this, the moon will be conjunct Black Moon Lilith in Virgo at the same time. Oh, this is very interesting. And in fact, it'll be quincunx, now that I'm looking at it, with Venus and Mercury. And quincunx is, there's going to be something, some sort of really deep inner guidance that's gonna be felt, that's going to be picked up on, that is going to be guiding us, right? But it's, I don't know if it's necessarily something that we're supposed to act on at that point, right? The quincunx suggests that we have to find a balance even between that, like accessing this like inner guidance, right? This depth of wisdom, and also being able to mentally kind of put some things aside and be able to rest and be in the company of people without getting into this depth place. That's going to be really interesting, because and I think what happens on, well, I know what happens on the 20th, which is that Jupiter and Uranus come into a conjunction. So eventually what you're going to see is that all of the energy in the personal is going to start coming into Taurus and meet up with Jupiter and Uranus. And they've been pretty much, off the radar for the most part. I mean, not during Pisces season, because everything is in sextile to Taurus. But Jupiter conjunct Uranus brings a lot of surprises, sudden opportunities, and a really strong need to just like break free, right? That's Uranus right there. And then Jupiter just expands it. Now it's in Taurus. So that has to do with the body, resources, income, material possessions, right? The land itself. So these surprises and sudden opportunities they can be in a lot of different areas, but they're going to be something very tangible. And the degree that they're conjunct is a white dove flying over troubled waters. Something, again, very tangible. Something that we can look at, and that's very material, that is also symbolic. The spiritual inspiration that comes to the individual in the overcoming of crisis. Now, one thing I have said to my, on the weekly this week, even just this week, the imagery about crisis, overcoming a crisis, the opportunities of overcoming a crisis are huge themes, and it's all throughout the season as well, right? So we know that crisis is here. We're either already experiencing it in our personal lives. There may be things that come to us at the macro. And this conjunction with Jupiter and Uranus is amazing because, yeah, it's spiritual inspiration. But you have to overcome the crisis. And so there might be something sudden that comes up that you're like, whoa, what is that? You might feel a significant disruption, right? You might want to just like drop everything when this happens, because Jupiter really is like, it's just the big picture. And when Jupiter does come into Gemini during this season, before the solstice, I mean, Jupiter's at its weakest in Gemini. It's all about the details. So right now it's still, able to just kind of sit in big picture land without too much of how to implement things. So it's impossible to predict what's going to happen because it's Uranus, right? And Uranus is erratic, and Jupiter is just expanding on all of that, right? It's just like hot air blowing up a balloon. So it could be anything from sudden financial windfall, especially when we're talking about Taurus, right? A promotion. It could be, opportunities for expanded awareness, right? We're talking about Jupiter. And one of the things that's important is to be flexible, to be open-minded. There could be breakthroughs. And I would say, considering that the degree has to do with the spiritual inspiration that comes to somebody overcoming of a crisis, I do feel like there'll be very big breakthroughs and solutions to old problems, right? This is huge on 420. Right after Venus and Mercury come into that conjunction. So Mercury stations direct on the 24th, and then Mars meets Neptune at the end of April. So you can see that there's still just like so much that's happening. And to my read, for the most part, is that it's a lot of opportunity, right? Now, granted, Jupiter and Uranus coming together is very erratic. You can't predict it. I wouldn't try to predict it, right? Because if you could predict and know everything, then there would be no mystery. And that's not why we're here, right? So the 24th is when Mercury stations direct, and it's going to station direct at the same degree that the North Node has been sitting at for how long now? 15 to 16 degrees, which is, nature spirit seen at work in the light of sunset, attunement to the invisible aspects of nature, right? To the actual energy that we may not see, but we know is very much there and in operation, right? It's the same thing. The seed becomes viable and starts to catalyze all these reactions in order to grow into a plant. We don't see that. We only see the results of that process, right? That's the divine spark. And 16 degrees of Aries is the awareness of the potency from that divine spark. So again, the 20th, 420, we have this conjunction with Jupiter and Uranus, and we're like, whoa! And then Mercury stations direct like right after, and we're moving forward, and we are either we're mentally tuned in to the divine spark and what it can do, or we haven't learned anything, right? That is definitely, or we're tuned into somebody else's invisible forces, and that is absolutely a possibility, right? That really just depends on the individual and what they're exposing themselves to and where their attention and energy is. So the 29th oh boy, the 29th, Mars and Neptune meet. So remember when Venus and Neptune came into that conjunction first. And well, actually, the Sun and Neptune come into the conjunction on the 17th of March. Then Venus and Neptune, and now Mars and Neptune. Now, this can really go, just like with the Mars conjunct Saturn, it can go two ways. It can really make you feel incredibly enthusiastic and positive in terms of your dreams and spiritual goals, right? You're going to like output yourself, like you are going to be the light that breaks through the prism, right? If that is a really strong potential. It could also make you paranoid and delusional. It really depends on so many other factors. However, you can be, either way, you're going to be very sensitive, easily scared, right? And you need to like tap into that Mars energy for courage, right? It's going to be melted away, dissolved a little bit by Neptune. So you have to take precaution. If you are self-confident, you consider yourself having awareness and a certain amount of spiritually evolved, if you even want to say that, this could be an incredible spiritual trip. And like I said, positives to look forward to, more energy, more enthusiasm to chase your dreams and your goals. Love relationships can benefit, right? Because Mars ruling Aries and Scorpio is the output. It's the male energy outputting, right? And so there can be a lot of that type of relationship energy, sexual magnetism, charismatic appeal, things like that. And it can be very spiritual, right? Kind of that soulmate quality to them. And you can confidently pour your energy into things that you care about and that mean something to you, right? You can really do some serious healing work with this type of conjunction, especially, as the late degrees of Pisces, right? That Neptune is just infusing everything, right? We can't even help ourselves. Venus and Mars is just that part of ourselves that is the masculine and feminine. Neptune is the all, right? It's the agent of dissolving everything, so we know nothing but the all. And so everything that we feel and then we do has we're overflowing, and it's got to go somewhere, and that's where Mars comes in. So negatives to watch out for can be to over idealize things, leave yourself open to deception. It's really important to stay grounded in the real world with this type of transit, especially with the late degrees of Pisces. People could see generosity as weakness, right? Attracting the spiritual and psychic vampires. So just be aware of being extra sensitive and really pulling these energies towards you. But again, the Mars energy allows for the outputting of energy and enthusiasm. So just protect yourself. And here's the thing, Mars is coming into Aries it's coming home right after this. And so then it's really on, right? Like it is time for the seed to start to be planted in the soil, so to speak, right? Now we come into May, and the first thing off the bat is that Pluto is going to station retrograde. So the moon on May Day, right before May Day, is going to meet Pluto, and then Pluto is going to station to do its retrograde at 2 to 3 degrees Aquarius, right? So this is the beginning of all the retrogrades of the outer planets. 3 degrees Aquarius is a deserter from the Navy. Defiance, truly, genuine psychological courage in a repudiation of all meaningless loyalties. This is where Pluto stations retrograde. It's going to go back into Capricorn one last time, 30 degrees Capricorn, and station direct in October. So that's going to take us out into the eclipse cycle, right? Is the Pluto retrograde, which is very fitting considering that Pluto and the nodes of the moon are very related to each other in the astrological chart. So Pluto stations retrograde on the 2nd, and this is when we kind of survey the destruction that has already happened with Pluto, right? So this can be a very difficult time. There's a lot of emptiness. It's like fallow, and it's like surveying the landscape. Okay, like what has been destroyed so far, and really taking a look at what has happened and where things could go. The sun is in a conjunct. So now we're starting to get into the conjunctions with Uranus. This is in May. And Mercury is about to exit its shadow as well. And let's see, where are you, Mercury? There you are. So, and the sun will come into a conjunction with Uranus on the same day. So this is like mid-May. So I believe it's the 13th that the sun is in a conjunction with Uranus. So Jupiter already started the process, right? So it was big picture, expansive, understanding, right? And then the sun comes into a conjunction with Uranus while Mercury is coming out of its shadow. So this is the point where Mercury, ever since, the beginning of April or actually mid-March, right? Before the equinox, is now moving into new territory. So, and then Sun conjunct Uranus, which is usually a time of great excitement, a more unexpected change, freedom, rebellion, a strong urge to break from routine, right? You don't want to resist this change because I'm telling you, it will come up. Now, the degree that these two are conjunct is really powerful too. It's like a mounted warrior riding fiercely, and they got a bunch of scalps, you know what I mean? It's a complete command over one's physical environment, their bodies, and what's around them. So it's quite the imagery, right? And then you have Sun conjunct Uranus at this particular degree on the 13th of May. So it can open your consciousness to higher vibrations. It could be resulting in greater self-awareness, psychic perception, right? Again, Sun conjunct Uranus. You got to be flexible and open-minded because there are things you can't account for that change, things that come up that really maybe shock you or excite you. You could meet new and unconventional types of people. Now, consider the fact that these two bodies, the Sun and Uranus, they rule opposite signs. So they're also naturally in opposition to each other because one represents the individual ego in expression, and Uranus represents the collective mind of humanity. or represents the means in which we come to that higher awareness. So when they're in opposition, it's quite natural, actually. And so there's a lot that can come out of it, right? You can the negative side to this is that this impulsive energy can lead people to take risks. And with how powerful the imagery of the degree in Taurus is, you can see people taking unnecessary risks to try to take some heads, if you know what I mean. And you could really damage your position. You could cause an aggressive reaction. Just be aware of that, especially because Mercury is going to exit its shadow at Andromeda and move forward. So if you find there may be an anger that comes out of this, or that's really stemming from a nervous tension of not being able to really handle the responsibility of confronting people that are expecting more from you. And I'm thinking, there's a couple things I'm thinking about. Again, the thing on TikTok is really sticking out to me for some reason. You just don't want to take unnecessary risks because it is electric, it's impulsive, it becomes like an ego glorification in some ways, and you don't want to you don't necessarily want to make that worse, right? But you also don't want to resist it entirely because you'll still get change. It just won't be pleasant, or it'll be really disruptive. So mid-May, things are going to start getting really weird. Mercury is coming into Taurus and will square Pluto, which can lead to really intense interactions. Now, Pluto's retrograde. It's retrograde, and we're still in this period of like defiance, you know what I mean? Maybe it's pulling that energy into our personal experience of like, you know what, like my real power is coming from the ability to stand up to that which I don't, that I completely repudiate. And Mercury in Taurus is like, that's great, but there is a natural process to these things, including your own mental processes and the communication, right? You can't just force people. Just because you're having that experience with the retrograde of Pluto doesn't mean other people are experiencing it the same way. So yes, intense interactions with people with Mercury square Pluto. And what day is that? The 17th, I believe. Let's look at it. So May, it's like, it starts to get intense, around this time. Not that it isn't already, but you'll see coming into the end of Taurus, right? We got all this Pleiadian energy, like it's a lot, right? Jupiter and the Sun and Uranus are all conjunct the Pleiades and Algol, and then Venus is on her way because she rules Taurus. My gosh, she'll be the most happy here and the most grounded coming through Taurus, which is a good thing, honestly. But then the 17th is when Mercury squares Pluto. Yes, there we go. And it gets very intense. So when you have really extreme ideas, or you try to force or convince others, it can backfire, right? And people become very naturally defensive under this influence, but it's essential not to let your fighting spirit back you into a corner, right? You don't necessarily, maybe you do need to allow this process of defiance, whatever that means to you, it's at a soul level, and it's working within the individual, right? It's got this magnetic quality, and so it's really going to challenge your thinking. That's the other thing. It's like you feel this this need to defy what you can't stand anymore, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but the retrograde is what gives me pause here, because the challenge is to, feel that, integrate that, like be comfortable with that darker side of things and that intensity and that deep dive psychologically, but also in your own mind to let things develop naturally. That's going to be very difficult. So you're going to want to, the tendency will be to become defensive and to get too intense and to force things, and maybe you just have to take the high road by maintaining an open mind and not arguing for the sake of it, right? And this can really lead to some positive transformation. Now, Venus, right after this, is going to conjunct Uranus as well. So now we have this huge stack up in the Pleiades with Venus, Uranus, Jupiter, and Jupiter and the Sun are conjunct as we're about to come into Gemini season. So again, Venus conjunct Uranus, big change and excitement with love or money or both, right? Especially in Taurus, I would say possessions. Your increased need for stimulation can lead to changes, or there'll be unexpected change around you. Again, what's the degree here that these two are conjunct? Same thing, right? It's a mounted warrior. You know, if things are stagnant in your life, you're more likely to rebel. You may like try to seek a thrill by like tapping into this command of yourself. And there are healthy ways to stimulate yourself in this situation, right? Find, ways to amuse yourself or ways to thrill yourself, to feel that command without it being a negative thing, right? And like I said, this can come with money and possessions, right? I think with Taurus, it's a very good chance. But, things that are meaningful are relationships too, right? And creative talent can really come into play with a Venus conjunct Uranus as well. You could come into command of your physical environment by the production of your art. So that could be very powerful as well. At the same time, though, Sun is conjunct Jupiter, and there is a perspective that is going to be very optimistic. Like having perspective of balance, there's that balance thing again, is going to give a general feeling of optimism and well-being. That's the nature of Sun conjunct Jupiter, in general. So this is an opportunity for personal and spiritual growth, even professional growth. You can feel an urge or strong desire to do things and experience everything very fully and in a way that allows you to have mature perspective. You understand both sides of a situation. And this is about expansion in all areas of life. So you might begin something new in terms of studies or long distance travel, since we are talking about Jupiter. I would say it has a lot to do with resource, though, and possessions and value and material stuff. But Jupiter's tendency towards growth and expansion can apply to negative character traits, and greed is one of them when we're talking about Taurus. So it may also be that you spend a lot of time being kind of either impoverished or struggling financially. This conjunction may actually be an expansion of gifts or money, right? Or people being very generous. So, you don't want to get caught up in being boastful or greed or being super extravagant, blowing all your money. Like, what if you came into money from being very struggling financially, and then you get this windfall of money with this conjunction? It's really meant to give you a mature understanding. I'm on both sides of this. And so then you are growing and expanding spiritually. Otherwise, you could find yourself being very greedy and very thoughtless with this as well. And with Venus conjunct Uranus also in Taurus, and they're all with the Pleiades like this, I would say that this is very amazing, actually. There's a lot of potential there too. Now, the Sun comes into Gemini, and this is going to be a transit I really want to focus on too. So let's see here. And this is going to happen multiple times. When Mercury comes into Gemini, when Jupiter comes into Gemini, when Venus comes into Gemini, they're all going to come into a trine with Pluto in its retrograde. So just talk about, first it'll be the Sun, so very intense and profound experiences, right? And so you're going to be driven to research and investigate. There's just a lot of positive and powerful transformation to the individual sense of self, because that's what the Sun represents. And so you also can exert this influence over people and events in your life, right? Because you're shining just like the Sun, and in that trine to Pluto, it's very stabilizing in terms of the power. You can use this transit to really clear away some stuff in your life, and especially in your mind, when we're going to talk about Gemini in the sense of your own mind and the collective mind. And the collective mind going through this process with Pluto is going to have an ability to cleanse and organize and clear out the clutter in your own mind, and in your own way of identifying with your consciousness, I guess you could say. So this is a great time to study the mysteries or challenging fields, and just having positive transformation, right? Pluto rules elimination. And in a retrograde, it has a lot to do with that, right? Because you're pulling that Pluto energy into your personal experience. And the sun is all about our personal experience being expressed. And so we have to make room for that, though. And I think that's a big part of what this trine represents. It's one thing to communicate outwardly, it's another to listen and to receive. And this has a lot of energy around receiving something, and creating a space to receive something. Now, Venus is going to conjunct Neptune and then trine conjunct Neptune and then trine Pluto as well right after this. So all this Pleiadian energy. Wow. This probably warrants its own, honestly, it probably warrants its own special video, because there's so much going on there that I can't even get into right now. So Venus conjunct Jupiter, again, it's just harmony and happiness, and you don't have to struggle, right? It benefits of the good karma accrued, right? Beautiful things are attracted to you. And this is the last degree of Taurus. I mean, the personal display of all inherited gifts, right? And then coming together with the two most benefic planets in the solar system. So you have inner harmony, warmth, and friendliness. It's very attractive. This should be time spent out and about, engaging with as many people as possible. Oh my God, it's like a peacock strutting. Oh my. And then both of them in their conjunction with each other are in a sextile to Neptune. So then it's blessed by Neptune on top of that. And then they each come into Gemini, and they each trine Pluto. And so there's this blessing of everything that we have accumulated, inherited, all of our gifts, and personally displaying them, and then coming into Gemini, and each of them is in a trine to Pluto that just like gives this extra surge of power, real regenerative power. And this is all at the end of May. And at the very end of May, Mercury comes into a conjunction with Uranus, and then also comes into Gemini. So let's look at that real quick. Oh no. Mercury, here, while that's loading, there we go. Mercury conjunct Uranus, right? Talk about like the mind just plugging in directly. Let's see here. There we go. To the overmind, right? And the interesting thing is that it could cause a short, right? Mercury conjunct Uranus, it could short out your brain. But this particular degree of Gemini is really about pruning things back. So it stimulates your thinking. Mercury conjunct Uranus, especially in Gemini. Mercury rules Gemini. So this is going to be a very electrifying influence on your brain, on our brains. And so it's a very ideal time for any type of mental work or create, especially in Gemini. But what it's going to do, I think, is going to give people, the ability to really prune back everything that's not going to yield, right? And so these are really great conditions, honestly, for scientific or technical fields, where grasping concepts is more important than memorizing a formula. And part of the grasping of concepts is that you're going to cut back things that don't matter. Things that aren't going to go anywhere, right? You're going to like prune the plant, and so that it's only, you're going to focus on pruning the plant so that it has healthy growth that is actually going to yield, right? But there's also could be unexpected news that could be good or it could be bad, right? With Mercury conjunct Uranus. And again, it could lead to needing to prune some things back, right? Your speech could become very abrupt as well. But I just see that this is a time for higher awareness. This is a sense, because Mercury rules Gemini. I mean, yes, there are errors that are likely. That's the thing. It's just so electric with Uranus involved before it comes into Gemini. See, it's not in Gemini. I'm sorry. It's in Taurus, 25 degrees Taurus. Oh my gosh. Sorry, guys. I don't know why I wrote that down. I think I just got ahead of myself when I was taking my notes. I was like, yeah, Gemini. But you can see here that they're in the Pleiades. So it's still electrifying influence on our brains. It is very good for, like I said, interrupting conversations, blurting things out, fidgeting, nervous conditions, because Uranus is like, the higher mind influencing, it's like getting all the signals at once into your own brain. But it also is in Taurus. So it's kind of just spread out in a lot of ways. It's very grounded, but it could be very erratic as well. But I would say with the nature of Taurus involved, I feel like it will be very grounded. Now we come into June, and that's when Mercury enters Gemini. That's when Venus comes into a conjunction with the Sun. That's when Mercury trines Pluto. And the big one that I would say is important to pay attention to before we start getting into all the squares to Saturn, which are going to be very difficult, leading up, and Neptune, leading up to the solstice, is that Mercury and Jupiter will come into a conjunction in Gemini. And I think this is really important because Jupiter is going to be at its detriment in Gemini, right? Sagittarius is its home territory. And so when a planet is in the sign opposite of its home, it's at its detriment, it's at its weakest, right? And let's go back here. Very beginning, that Jupiter and Mercury, right at the beginning of June, Jupiter and Mercury come into a conjunction with each other, okay? And this brings a lot of good news, optimism, and a happy frame of mind. And it's Mercury and Gemini meeting Jupiter is going to give the details to Jupiter that Jupiter really hates, right? Jupiter is not an energy about the details, right? Which is why it's at its weakest in Gemini. It's all about the big picture. Well, Mercury is all about the details. Mercury is all about the data points. And so they're going to come together and bring knowledge and understanding together with the capacity to bring duality together. Like, it's them coming together like this in Gemini is the process of alchemy when at its inception, right? It's not so much at its conclusion, which is more of a Sagittarius thing where you bring the things together, you transmute them, and they create something new. These come together in Gemini, and yeah, it's very positive coming together of knowledge and understanding, but it's the process of bringing the pieces of knowledge together, and at least being able to make sense of that, right? You may not have the conclusion necessarily, but you have brought these pieces together, and so that there is a conclusion that can be had at some point. But it's really bringing the ability to focus on the details to Jupiter, which is an energy that's like, I don't care about the details, right? I just care about the big picture. But this is important. You have to, if you're trying to take a big trip, you have to actually sit down and like logistically plan it out. That's what Mercury conjunct Jupiter is going to help with, is to be able to do these things. And it's usually making plans for the future are really good. Business deals are favored, right? Being the big picture, but need assistance to check the minor details. Well, Mercury in Gemini is exactly that energy. And Jupiter is going to be like, oh, thank you. I need somebody to come and help me check the minor details and be confident about it. So then we start getting into all the squares. And that's squares to Saturn, Venus, the Sun, Mercury. They're all going to square Saturn, and then they're all going to square Neptune. And so this is leading up to the solstice, where we're going to set those root systems down. So Gemini time is all about the seed that has germinated, it's pushed up through the soil, and it's just a seedling, right? There's no root system yet. It's still growing. It's reaching for the sun. And as we're doing that, the sun, Mercury, Venus, even the moon as it's coming into Gemini, and there will be a new moon in Gemini in June, we're going to... they're going to be tested with the square to Saturn and the square to Neptune, right? The square to Saturn with all of them The sun's going to square Saturn, Venus is going to square Saturn, right? Causes stress, causes distance, causes loneliness, depression, tests and challenges you, leads to pessimism and depression, right? With the sun square Saturn, your ego is tested, and then Mercury comes into a square with Saturn. This is a little bit better because it favors like hard mental work, right? So Sun and Venus, it's going to be difficult. We're going to feel like a test to our ego. We're going to feel lonely and depressed. We're trying to grow, and Saturn is just like, putting the foot down spiritually about everything. Are you in alignment with the grand design? No? Okay, well, you're going to have to adjust yourself in this square. The square with Mercury and Saturn, it might be bad news. There may be distance in relationship, but it's at least giving our mental capacity in Gemini, right, some grounding, because Mercury in Gemini is is best. Mercury is at its best in Gemini. It's just like any idea, all ideas, everything is considered. Let's just follow all of these threads wherever they go. And Saturn is just like, hello, here's reality. And so at least Mercury and Saturn coming together will bring our heads back to reality, even if Venus and the Sun square Saturn are like a huge bummer. And it's very possible that by the time we get to this point in the beginning of June, that it starts to get really difficult again. Now, Mercury will conjunct the Sun at 25 Gemini, right? Like I said, right? The gardener trimming all the palm trees, all the pruning. And so the Mercury Cazimi at this degree is like, okay, let's like start cutting everything back that we don't need. And I think that it's all those squares to Saturn beforehand that are going to be kind of the reality check about it. And then you have this sense of like, okay, I have some actual, I feel capable enough now to cut back what is unnecessary, right? Like I feel and I've leaned into the discomfort of the reality check, and now I'm like, okay, well, it's time to cut this back, and this isn't going to yield, and taking some initiative. Then the squares to Neptune leading up to the solstice. So Venus is going to square Neptune, and Mercury is going to square Neptune, and the Sun is they're all going to square Neptune before the solstice. And so again, insecurity, susceptible to disappointment, right? Because Neptune at the last degree of Pisces is just like, it's whatever you visualize, right? Mercury distorts your thinking, you're confused, there's a lack of clarity, and the Sun square Neptune weakens your vitality. So right before you put those root system down, there's going to be big tests, in terms of what you're making decisions about and where you're going to put your root system down. And that's, we have that cycle every year with the solstice. Well, if we but this year, it's like because of Neptune's position and Saturn's position in Pisces, they're going to have squares to all of it. What is the ultimate spiritual implication of all of these things that we are thinking about and about to make decisions about? So those tests aren't terrible. They're just going to be difficult. So in closing, and certainly in conclusion, I know that there's all the propaganda about the eclipses. We're going to go into so much of that on the eclipse forecast if you're interested in that. But there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a necessity to take advantage of the transits, because once we get into June, and certainly as we are getting closer to the solstice, where we are going to identify with that roots, where we belong, where's our loyalties, like where's our real power actually stemming from, that is going to be, we're going to need to have an awareness about that so that we can make the most of that time period. And everything leading up to that is either going to challenge that or is going to support where we're going. But I would say ultimately, the eclipse is going to be weird. There may be communication disruptions. I think the Mercury retrograde is going to be a big part of that. But there's going to be opportunities to make the most of that. There's something really cool and beautiful and a lot of potential coming forward, but a lot, and we'll be starting to grow, and we'll be feeling it and reaching toward the light. And then right before the solstice, there'll be big tests, right? There'll be big tests and lots of energies that will stand to dissolve everything that we have come to decide at that point. And we'll have to, be really strong in our spiritual position, right? Especially with Neptune in Pisces, because what we are visualizing, the imprint of the frequency that we're carrying spiritually comes into form. And Neptune at these last degrees of Pisces is a really big indication of that. Like whatever it is that we're visualizing is coming in. And this is a big part of the eclipse too, knowing that, deep down at the soul level, those types of interior formulations, they're going to be incubating for months and months. But at least at the solstice, we'll know that a root system, again, this is all going back to the ability to trust and to surrender and to trust our own internal intrinsic value and our relationship to God or source, and to be able to extract what we need for our own growth and development out of the situations that are at hand, right? And knowing that there'll be a lot of growth and positive developments. And then once we hit June, leading up to the solstice, the squares to Saturn and Neptune are going to make it really difficult and really test that. So if you're aware of that to begin with, then when you get to this point, you'll be ready. You'll be like, you know what? I'm waiting. I'm ready. I know that the tests are coming, and it'll help, it'll help all of us determine, if we're ready, if we're ready to put our root system down where we thought we were. So it's going to be interesting times, my friends. So I hope that really helped. I hope it made sense. It wasn't too rambly. I wanted to make sure that I hit on the big ones the most as we go through the next couple of months. Please let me know if you need any clarification, if you have questions. The comment section is open. I don't ever disable comments. And if you're interested in the eclipse readings or just more information about monthly subscription and what that entails, everything is in the description box below. So my friends, thank you for being here. I truly, truly appreciate each and every one of you so very much. Enjoy the equinox. Enjoy all of the creative potential that is encapsulated in each of us, in our soul. And I will see you on the next video. Take care, everyone.